Introduce our distinguished guest, Rachel Thomas, who's come to us from the Bay Area. Rachel currently serves as president and board member of the Sheryl Sandberg and Dave Goldberg Family Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that runs leanin.org. And so under Rachel's leadership, leanin.org has brought the messages of Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO of Facebook. Her best-selling book, Lean In, she's brought those messages to a global audience, and she oversees that organization's business operations. She shapes the strategy, content, and technology development that drives its public awareness campaigns, and she powers a community of more than 33,000 peer support groups called Lean In Circles in 154 countries. Before serving in this role, Rachel co-founded and served as President and Chief Marketing Officer of Subtext, which is the first collaborative reading platform for K-12 classrooms. Prior to Subtext, she served as Vice President of Marketing for Playdom, which is an online gaming company that was acquired by Walt Disney Company. She also led a large-scale strategy and marketing initiative for a number of consumer and technology brands, and founded and ran successful Web 1.0 recruitment firm called Brain Trust. She graduated with honors from Georgetown University and lives in Palo Alto with her husband Scott and two. So we are going to have a conversation. Do that for about half an hour, and then we're going to open up the floor for your questions.
Sure. So I don't know how many people in the group have read Lean In? Okay, great. So there's a pretty broad understanding of the book. So when Sheryl was writing the book, it was very important to her that the book not be an endpoint, that it be the beginning of something. Having worked at Google and Facebook, the idea of communities and coming together to support one another, is something that's really core to the way she sees the world. And so she immediately thought that there should be a community that was run that supported women on a daily basis. So the book was the beginning of something. A little bit of my own Lean In story. I had met Sheryl and knew her enough that if I saw her at like a large event, I could go up and say hello, but that was about it. And I saw a little blurb in, I don't even remember which magazine, that said she was writing a book based on her TED Talk. So I saw her at an event and marched up to her and said, "I'm thrilled you're writing a book." And she put me on the spot in front of a large group of people. I don't know if she remembers this, and said, "Well, what's the book about?" Since I was already a groupie, I was able to say, if it's anything like your TED Talk or your talk at Annapolis or Barnard, I think the book's probably about X, Q, Y, and Z. And out of that, she invited me to join about 24 women, and we began to meet in her living room and talk about what leanin.org would be and how we could support women best and what the organization would look like. At the time, we conceived it as a volunteer organization. But as we got closer to the book releasing, you could feel some momentum building. People that were reading the book, the response to it was incredible. It was just a moment in time where there was more discussion of women and the challenges we face in the zeitgeist. So one morning she called me. I was running a company at the time that I co-founded, and asked me if I would run it. And I didn't hesitate, and I said yes. And so I've been working for Sheryl, first running Lean In, and now more broadly running the foundation ever since. In terms of what's different, the book and the organization, a lot of it is the obvious things. The book was written at a moment in time with the research that was available at that moment in time, and with Sheryl's experiences to date. And she continues to evolve as a person, and we continue to evolve as an organization. So we do a lot more than we ever imagined we would when she wrote the book and we founded the organization. Our biggest program, which I know we're going to talk about today, is called Lean In Circles. So circles are small peer groups of women, usually 8 to 12, that meet on a regular basis to support one another and learn together. And I remember vividly sitting on Sheryl's couch when we knew that we were going to do this, and we both said if we could have 1,000 circles at the end of year one, that would be amazing. We really feel like we'd be driving change. And so as Janine mentioned, we have over 30,000 circles now in 154 countries, and what's amazing about that is this is a grassroots community. It's moving, woman to woman, city to city, country to country. We offer a lot of materials to help circles run, educational materials, discussion guide, videos that groups of women can watch together and discuss, but really fundamentally, it's about women coming together and wanting to support one another. As I mentioned, another big piece of what we do is all the educational materials and other materials to support that program. And you don't have to be in a circle to access all of our materials. We've worked with a lot of experts, a bunch of folks at the Clayman Institute at Stanford who do a lot of amazing work around gender. Since then, we've worked with professors and academics from a number of institutions. We'd like to find someone here to work with, so please let me know. But it's all about skill building for women, whether it's negotiating or using body language to exude confidence, to becoming a better leader, to finding a way to lead but find balance in your life. Lots of great content, and we're continuing to build out that library. And the other big thing we do is every year we run one big public awareness campaign on a topic we think is critical to advancing women. So this year for April 4th, which many of you probably know is Equal Pay Day. So sadly, that's the day in 2017 women need to work to make as much money as men made in 2016. Women on average are paid 20% less than men. Black women, sadly, are paid 37% less than men, and Hispanic women are paid 46% less than white men. So we did a big campaign, and what was really exciting was the first time we worked with our Circle community. So we worked with women in 25 cities in our community. We pulled together 350 businesses in those cities to offer a 20% discount to shine a light on the unfairness of the gap. We also commissioned some great research, which was some new research around the gender gap, and we worked with a number of national companies. We worked with Lyft, Lunabar, Procter & Gamble, and Salesforce to actually run national discounts and push out a lot of programming around Equal Pay Day, and that was so successful that we'll do that again next year. And another public awareness campaign that we started a couple years ago, and it's been so successful, it's become part of our regular drumbeat each year. It's obviously so important that we bring men into the conversation. We're not going to drive change unless men are on board. We're 50% of the population, they're the other 50%. So we've been working with the NBA on a campaign for the last 3 years called Lean In Together, which is about the practical ways that men can support the women in their lives, be the co-workers, partners, daughters, friends, and then the benefits to them for doing so, because sometimes we unfortunately end up in a conversation where gender equity is a zero-sum game, and in reality, all ships rise when we get to a more equal world. So if you're a big NBA fan, you'll see our ads running during the season. Typically, they run about 10,000 ads a season, which is just amazing to imagine all the people that we're touching during each season. So that's just a little smattering of some of the things that we do, and we can talk about more as we continue to go.
So tell us about the Women in the Workplace study that Lean In runs, and in partnership with McKinsey & Company and the Wall Street Journal. Share some of the results.
So you'll have to stop me because I could talk ad nauseum about the Women in the Workplace study. So this was really a pet project of mine. This will be the 3rd year we're doing it. And I'm excited to announce last year 132 companies participated, touching, I think it was 8 million employees. This year we have over 200 companies participating. And there is an attitudinal section. You're academics. So there's an attitudinal section where we ask employees directly, both men and women, a series of questions. Last year, about 32,000 employees participated. This year, we think we'll have 100,000, which is one of the largest, we think, data sets on the study of women in the workplace. So sadly, and what we found 2 years ago, last year, and what I believe we'll find again this year, is that women are underrepresented at every level in organizations, particularly at the most senior levels. This is not surprisingly, given all the data that we've all seen, this is worse for women of color, and particularly, the numbers are particularly grim for Black women. So what we learned last year, though, which was surprising to us, and again, I wish it was more encouraging, is that women are hitting the glass ceiling much earlier than we imagined. Men are more likely to get that first critical promotion to manager in corporate America than women are. So from the very get-go in their careers, women are set off on a trajectory that is different than men's trajectory. The other thing we learned, and you know a lot of this in your own personal experiences or other research you've read, but women get less access to senior leaders in organizations. That has an impact on their career. Usually get less access to those stretch assignments or projects that get you noticed in organizations. We know women are asking for feedback at the same rates as men, but are less likely to get that really direct, actionable feedback that helps you know what to do to improve. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but we also learned one thing that was encouraging is that women are asking for raises and lobbying for promotions at the same rate as men, because there's earlier research that has indicated that that's not the case, but they face more pushback when they do. And the way I think about it is, it's an uneven playing field. It is clear from all the data that women are not having the same experiences in the workplace as men are. But it's kind of like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Any one of those things is not really the end of the world in a given day or in your career. But when all of those things are happening pretty systemically on a regular basis, it has a big impact on women. So we know that women are actually less interested in becoming senior leaders, and you'll often get people say, look, that's because women don't want to be senior leaders. And the argument that I would make, which we can't actually find in our data, but we all know is true, is that it's because women are having a different experience. So if you look up in the hill to climb is steeper, and you're getting less support at home, of course you're going to be less interested in senior leadership than men who are on a different path. So this year we're really excited. We always wish the data told a different story, but we think it's critically important to get it out into the world. We partner with the Wall Street Journal, as Janine said. So there's usually a large section in the Wall Street Journal every fall on all of the findings. One thing that people don't always realize is we've committed with McKinsey to do this year over year. So we're going to be able to give companies longitudinal information about what's happening in their organizations. We're also benchmarking them against top performers generally and top performers in their industry. And they all get an individual report. So certainly the very public-facing portion of the report is critical in that it's driving a conversation that we think is very important in corporate America and more broadly. But it's really the one-to-one out to the organizations, benchmarking them and giving them very practical recommendations for what they can be doing in their own organization that we hope is driving change company to company. We've seen slight bits of movement in the entry and mid-levels within organizations, so it's not all doom and gloom. We have seen some improvement. As I said, we're seeing signs that women are doing more and using their voices more and asking for more, which of course is critical to driving change. And the other piece that I do find incredibly encouraging is McKinsey did something similar for the first time several years ago. They ran a smaller version of women in the workplace. And if you look at that data compared to the data we have for the last 2 years, companies are more committed to gender equality and to equality more broadly in their organizations than ever before. So they are having a lot of the right conversations and putting a lot of the right policies and change in place. Just unfortunately, change is hard. And change takes all of us. And the one thing I just wanted to comment on that Rebecca mentioned as a side note is there is research, and you probably know this because you're a gender scholar, but there's research that shows when organizations think they're a meritocracy, they're actually more prone and susceptible to bias. What we really need to understand is that bias exists. It's implicit. We're all victim to it, and we all need to correct. So just when you're in organizations where that's not the conventional wisdom, it just means you need to push harder and shine a brighter light on implicit bias. So just as a side note.
So one of the findings that came out of the workplace study was that negotiation is really important, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit. One of the things that we were really excited to see.
Janine, we couldn't really hear the question.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So one of the findings that came out of the Women in the Workplace study is that negotiation is really critical. So I was just asking her to talk more about that.
Yes, I mentioned this a little bit, but one of the things that we were excited to see, the good news is that our study shows that women are lobbying for promotions and asking for raises at the same rates as men, which has not always been conventional wisdom. There's other research that shows that is not the case. And not surprisingly, if women are lobbying more and negotiating more, they are getting better results. So all of you, the women who do that, get better results than the women who don't. What is, of course, discouraging is that we know that women face pushback when they do. So the women in our study who negotiated were more likely to be called aggressive, intimidating, bossy, so they're paying a social penalty for doing so. And many of you in the room probably already know this, but this is rooted in very age-old stereotypes about what we expect from men and women. We expect men to be assertive, to advocate them for themselves, to take the lead. So when someone does that in any context, a negotiation included, we expect that from men. Women, we expect to be communal, less aggressive, more focused on the overall organization. And so when we advocate for ourselves, we often do face that social pushback. So good news, women are asking, it works. Bad news is that we need to really change the way we think about women negotiating and speaking up for themselves. And one of the things that's interesting, I encourage you to check it out. I've seen a lot of content around women in negotiating and what women can do, and we always say that first and foremost, we're really bummed with a lot of the advice that we give, because we're basically saying, it stinks that women face pushback, so here's what you need to do in the meantime until we solve what is actually the more fundamental problem. But on our website, Ashley Rosette, she's a professor at Duke, who's amazing. She just did a series of videos for us on negotiation, and I do encourage you to check them out. I learned more than I had learned about negotiation in a long time from it through a gender lens. And I'll just share a couple things because I thought they were particularly interesting. Some of it's the obvious stuff, but still, make the first offer. First of all, go ask. Make the first, make the first offer. Like if asked, how much, have something to say. We know that when women are asked, or anyone asks explicitly for how much more they want, they're more likely to get a higher comp increase. But the things that we learned that I thought were particularly interesting is you're often told, or I was kind of raised to kind of have a poker face, be pretty serious when you're in negotiations, and actually she has research that shows kind of being kind of warmer and friendlier, friendly begets friendly, so I thought that was particularly interesting. And another point she made, which I can't believe I hadn't thought about myself, is that a lot of times when we go into negotiation with a man, we kind of understand the pushback, and we adjust our behavior accordingly. We don't often think to do that when we negotiate with other women, but of course, we're just as susceptible to the stereotypes around women and asserting themselves as men are. So whomever you're negotiating with, male or female, remember the tone of it is incredibly important. Communal language, it's not I, it's we, is incredibly important, and that's regardless of whether you're talking to a woman or a man.
Thank you. So we did a survey as part of the retreat. So all the women here participated in a survey, and one of the things. Okay. All right. Does that work? Can you hear me now? So, leading up to the retreat, all of you filled out a survey, and we looked at those results. And one of the things that came out from that survey, and that we understand broadly from the university, is that women are doing more service and also teaching more than men are, and that there's a fair amount of frustration with this. So, what advice can you offer us on how to say no gracefully without penalty, or how to advocate for more rewards for the service that we do? And let me just take a second to explain what service is in a university campus. So by this we mean things like sitting on committees. These might be really important committees, but we are participating more than men are in the operations of the institution, but not necessarily getting more rewards for that.
So we call this, as do some other experts in the field, we call this office housework. So this is doing the, and sadly we often do more housework at home, it's true, research still bears that out, and we are doing more office housework in our professional lives as well. And exactly as Janine said, this is mentoring people, planning events, sitting on committees. And although it is incredibly, and I really want to pause here, it's incredibly important work. In fact, we know that teams that are more helpful to one another and do more of this type of work are actually more effective and often get better results. So I do want to punctuate, this is important work to be doing. The problem is it's often not the type of work that gets you noticed. It's not that mission critical, high profile work. And I know it's a huge issue in academia, it's a huge issue everywhere. This is a tricky one, but I think there's a couple things that you can do. One is get one of those juicy assignments, get one of those critical assignments, and so when you're asked to do office housework, you can say, I would love to, but I already have a project I'm working on for X, Q, Y, or Z, but I recommend, and you can kind of point to someone down the hall. We call this the strategic no, and the reason the strategic no is sadly important is that, again, going back to stereotypes about women and men, since we expect women to be more communal and more helpful, we are often penalized when we say no to doing this type of work where men are not. In fact, there are some studies that show that when women do this type of work, we get very little improvement in performance reviews, like it doesn't have much of an impact. When men do, however, they are rewarded for it. And conversely, when men don't do it, they rarely pay a penalty, and women are more likely to pay a penalty. So the strategic no is important. I'll probably talk about this later because it's advice we give a lot, which is this idea of forming a posse and kind of working together. So it's often hard for you to say no, but a coworker or another woman in your department sitting next to you can say, "Ooh, Rachel's, I don't know if you remember, but Rachel's already weighted down with X and Q and Y project, how about we have Bob do it?" So you can kind of do what we call, form a posse. And then for all of you who are more senior in the organization, in the department you're in, or have more of a voice in what's going on at the university, we do need to talk more openly, explicitly that this work is valuable, and we need to find a way to value it. So there are some organizations, some companies that we work with that actually build it into their performance reviews. So the expectation is that you're doing it and you are actually evaluated against, the office housework you're doing. I think that's critically important. Making sure that there is an explicit conversation about an equal distribution of office housework is important. And then finding ways to reward office housework, because we know the reality is it's going to happen, and probably, it will still be more women doing it until we start to move the dial in other areas. And one of the things that our department at Stanford's doing that I think is particularly interesting is you actually earn kind of bucks for your office housework, and you can use that to hire research assistants or editors to help with other work you're doing. So they have found a way to put some type of financial reward against the office housework that helps with some of the more critical writing that you're trying to do. And as I understand it, that program has been pretty successful.
Okay, so a related question that also comes out of the survey that we did is that one thing that came up is women are fairly frustrated that issues like pay equity are not being addressed systemically across the university. At least that's the perception of the faculty. But at the same time, we have this culture that we live in, even though not all of us are from Minnesota, many of us are not from Minnesota, but there is a culture here that is pervasive of Minnesota nice, to be courteous, reserved, and mild-mannered, aversion to conflict and confrontation, a tendency towards understatement. And so this sometimes...
So I've never lived in Minnesota, clearly.
So what advice can you give us, given that we've got these critical issues, but we also are embedded in this culture of Minnesota nice?
Yeah, so first of all, I think there's so many things that are lovely about the idea of Minnesota nice. I just want to go on record and say a lot of this is rooted in what we call the likability penalty, which is that women are walking a tightrope in the workplace that men are not walking. So for us, if we assert ourselves, which is what we need to do to be seen as competent, so if we take the lead, if we speak up, if we assert ourselves, we're often less liked. But we need to assert ourselves to be seen as competent, but we're less liked. Men don't face this tightrope They can move really quickly in organizations. There's not a tension between asserting yourself and likability. And of course, this is a really big issue because who would you rather promote or advance? The person on your team who's competent and likable, or the person on your team who's competent but a little less likable? So it's a real thing that women face. It may, for some reasons, be slightly exacerbated in Minnesota, but this is something that women everywhere, face. And I'll never forget my aunt, who's a teacher. She's been teaching for 35 years. She was out recently, and she was reading some of our Lean In materials, and it was talking about the likability penalty. And she just had this moment where she was like, "That's what it is," because here she was like moving through her career and kind of feeling pushback when she really asserted herself, or pushback when she spoke up in meetings and not really understanding why. And so I do think it's really valuable to just realize that we are all on this tightrope together. It's not fair, but it's real, and we are having a different experience than men are. Things you can do. Some advice we give broadly, and I think it's applicable here. One of the things I already mentioned is forming a posse and kind of working with other women. We know that when women advocate for themselves or are overly self-promotional, or I should say are self-promotional, not overly, that actually implies that that they're overdoing it when they're not. They often face pushback, but you can actually advocate for other women and aggressively promote other women's accomplishments without any pushback. We work with, I wouldn't share this broadly, but we work with McKinsey and a number of their senior partners, female senior partners. There aren't a lot of senior partners in the organization. What they started doing a couple years ago was they wildly celebrate one another's accomplishments on email. They send it out to all of the partners. And it's gotten so the partners actually now noticed it, the male partners. They're like, "You're doing this together, aren't you?" And the answer was yes, but they kept doing it, and it's still producing results because it's hard to do it for yourself. So whether you're advocating for one another or you're pushing for something like pay equity, the more you work together, that can be incredibly effective. This is not rocket science, but I'll say it anyway. The more that you're linking it to results, we always say at Lean In, we wish that a lot of what we talked about, just because it was the right thing, is rationale enough, and unfortunately, it rarely is. So anything we do, we always think about, what's the right thing message and what's the smart thing message. So, how can we really compel business leaders and organizations to drive change? And often that's what hits their bottom line, or what show, evidence that performance goes up. So I'm sure that a number of you have already done this, but doing research about research into other university systems that are experimenting with pay equity in interesting ways and have good results, that would be particularly valuable. And on a personal level, we often recommend, if you have to be a toughie in a meeting or at work or with your team, do whatever you can to link that to business goals. So I am frustrated because we're behind on X, and that's going to have an impact on the organization, is a lot better way to communicate frustration or to assert yourself. So always just linking it to business goals whenever you can. So I talked about the posse. I talked about just really making the intellectual, kind of practical argument for all of the discussions that you're having. And then I think the final thing is just, and you mentioned this, just get comfortable with asserting yourself. I mean, the more that you do it, the more comfortable it feels. And really, celebrating one another when you do, I think is particularly helpful as well. I know it's small, but it really makes a difference woman by woman, the more that you start speaking up, and particularly if you're speaking up together.
Okay, the last thing I want to ask you, Rachel, is to talk about the circles. We mentioned that Lean In now has 33,000 circles worldwide. Tell us where the idea came from. Tell us why they're so effective and what you think the impact has been.
Yeah, the idea came from, we know that women often have less access to mentorship, particularly the senior level mentorship that can be particularly valuable, and then less access to sponsorship as well. And there is some research that shows that peer mentorship can be just as valuable as traditional mentor-mentee relationships. So the initial idea for circles was, wow, if women aren't getting what they need in the workplace, like how can we do something where women can come together and provide each other with that type of support. You know, there's also research, we know that we can accomplish more in groups often than we can as individuals, and many of our circles are female only, and I know that there is also some research that I think is particularly interesting, but often all female groups are places where women will talk more openly about challenges they're facing or are kind of more willing to try new things. Circles don't have to be all female. In fact, there's a number of examples we have in our community of male-female circles that are working really effectively. But that was the initial idea. If you can't get mentorship through other channels or more traditional channels, how can we bring women together to support one another? It's been amazing to watch the program grow. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're a really small team. We're the biggest we've ever been by a lot, and there's 30 of us. So we're a small team with this very big global network. So it's mostly around self-service materials, and really women are making circles, you know, their own. Just the fundamentals are getting together, being open and honest with one another, focusing on a goal. So it's not a bitch session. You're there to actually learn something new together or drive change together. And they've been manifesting themselves in all types of really interesting ways. So I'll share a couple of examples. Intel runs circles, and Intel has a pipeline problem, which many of you are familiar with. If there's less women in STEM, that means there's less female engineers, and they're very particularly heavy engineering culture. And so a lot of women start to feel like they're islands at Intel. And so they've been using their Circles program to bring women together across departments to support one another. And they have some early evidence that it's actually increasing retention for women, which is pretty incredible. MetLife is one of the organizations that we work with that has been running Circles for the longest. Like early in our first year, they started Circles. And it's been interesting to watch that program evolve. I think that there's a lot you can learn from them. It started as a really grassroots, just a small group of circles in their New York office that fairly junior women started. And MetLife began to see that the circles were working and that the women who were in the circles were having a very positive experience. So they started to get more involved actively and make it a larger, more official program. And one of the things that they're doing is using circles to allow more senior women to mentor at scale. So senior women will sometimes moderate or kind of pop in and work with the circles, and that's been really effective. The other thing that they've done, talking about, you know, the difference between office housework and mission critical, is that women who are in circles at MetLife now, it's on your review that you're in a circle, and it's seen as a leadership activity. And so it's become very beneficial within the organization to be in circles. The other thing that we've seen a number of companies do, their D&I departments or their HR departments, which I think is quite clever, is they're using circles to bubble up issues that women are experiencing, but they're able to do it in, you know, it's less about a particular department. It's certainly not about a particular person. It's discussions and issues that are bubbling out of the larger Circles program, and they've been getting, in some cases, a lot of CEO or kind of senior leadership attention because they know the Circles program is running, they know it's growing, they know it's effective, and so they become increasingly interested in what Circles are talking about and how they can tap into some of the issues that are being surfaced in the Circle community. We have lots of anecdotes of kind of what's happening in Circles, which are always incredibly rewarding. You know, one of the biggest things is we know women are asking for more, and they're even role-playing their negotiations in their circles. That's been particularly effective. We survey our circles every year, and 85% of members attribute a positive change in their life back to their circle. And this past year, the two biggest things that they pointed to were feeling more confident, which we know is sadly critical for women because we often do face a confidence gap, and that has nothing to do with nature. I know you know that, but nothing to do with nature. It's because we're on that tightrope and lots of other inequities that we face. So, but feeling more confident and also feeling like they're more effective leaders. So those are just a couple different examples, but it's been amazing. We have them on college campuses. We have circles in all 5 branches of the U.S. military. And they, again, have allowed women to come together who often don't feel like they're getting enough support. And we have circles in a number of large organizations that we're partnered with. So happy to talk more about circles, but it's been an amazing program to watch. And I always love traveling because if I meet a woman on a plane or in a restaurant and I say I run Lean In, one of the first things many of them will say is, I'm in a Lean In circle, and then they'll have a story about the impact it's had on their lives.
So I want to thank Rachel for this, and then we're going to open up the floor to your questions.
Yes?
Hi. Thanks for coming. A few minutes ago, in the context of assertiveness versus likability, you said something about the right message versus the smart message. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of times, I mean, at Lean In, like, we want to drive results. We're very results focused.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, so she asked, could I elaborate more on the right message versus the smart message? And so what I was saying is that, you know, at Lean In, a lot of us are out of the tech industry. I'm out of the tech industry, so we're incredibly results oriented. In fact, we measure anything that's possibly measurable. And so when we do something, we want to drive results. And, you know, sadly, what we believe to be true, and I think this will resonate with most of you, is just saying something is the right thing to do often doesn't drive a lot of change. You know, we would have equal pay if making the argument that that was the fair and, you know, just thing to do was argument enough, and unfortunately it's not. So we often look for, you know, how can we make a compelling case that it's good for you? So I'll give you an example for our men's campaign, Lean In Together, which I mentioned is the campaign that we do with the NBA every year. We looked at all the research we could find on the benefits to men of supporting women. So we know that men who are in, you know, when couples are more 50-50, more equitable, they have happier marriages, divorce rates are lower, they have more sex. And actually, all joking aside, all the media we did on Lean In Together, we got have more sex in, like as aggressively as possible. We also know that the benefits that, you know, 50-50 households have on children, and, you know, is particularly daughters looking out and imagining, you know, what their lives could be and kind of seeing more potential. We know that men who work effectively with women, it's only commonsensical that if you can tap the full talents of the population and, you know, the women and men on your team, you're going to be a more successful manager and leader. So we went out with all of those benefits. So whenever I'm thinking about a new campaign we're going to launch or something new that we're going to do, we always start by doing as much research as we possibly can to point to what the benefits are. And so what I was saying when you're talking about pay equity here, one way to do it and still be Minnesota nice is to find all the research that you can on other universities that are closer to pay equity and having good results, or who are experimenting with different pay scales and getting better results. And as I said, it's not rocket science, just as we often forget to do that. And we kind of make a heart argument as opposed to a heart and a head argument for why we need to bring about change.
You mentioned, I think, the Duke professor who made the negotiations videos, and I wondered if you could give us a way to find those.
Yeah, so if you go to leanin.org/education, and actually we've got two great video series on negotiation. One is from Margaret O'Neill, who's a professor at Stanford. Hers is a little headier, but this is a heady audience where she kind of talks about from a very kind of meta level, how to think about negotiations and how to make sure it doesn't feel like a zero-sum discussion, like you can get to a common ground. And then, as I said, Ashley Rosette, which just have some really practical advice, particularly around the importance of tone and communal language, and that I thought was, you know, helpful, and I've read a lot on negotiations, so.
I just want to mention the Women's Center has a module on salary negotiation on our website.
Awesome.
Salary negotiation module on the Women's Center website.
And the one thing that you probably already know that I would just say on negotiation is there is research that says if you ask and don't get the increase, and I know that, you know, it works a little bit differently in an academic environment than it does in a corporate environment, but nevertheless, it actually elevates your stature to ask. Just the fact of negotiating alone is very positive. So I think that's always important to remember. There's almost no downside in having the discussion.
Hi, thanks a lot for coming. This is all really inspiring, and I'm a big fan of that book, Lean In. I had a question about balancing the interest in doing sort of the community service sort of work with the need for self-promotion and doing the work for your own career, like in academia. And so I'm going to ask the question kind of in a balance of what your experience was and maybe what you recommend for us. So you said you went to this talk and you went up to Sheryl Sandberg and you said, boy, I'm really interested, and you ended up being drawn into this. And I'm wondering if you felt you came into this in sort of a point of professional strength or weakness, and that's saying it a little bit too strongly, but I would say like to balance that, so I tend to sort of be drawn into these things that I feel are good community building and I want to contribute to, but at the same time, I think I got drawn into those too much, and I got feedback recently that I got into those too much to be promoted sort of in a timely manner. And so, so for someone like me who feels drawn to do those things and yet needs to spend time like that, or just in general, do you have any specific recommendations about balancing those two things?
So I have 2 comments. I hope they're helpful. So the one is the way I think about my own career. This may or may not resonate with you. Is it's kind of like a stovetop. And so I put most of my energy into the big pot. So the big pot is, what I think I need to do to be successful in whatever my core, job is. So I really understand from Sheryl what success looks like, and I'm focusing, 80% of my energy on my core job at the foundation and kind of what I need to do there. But I always have some side pots kind of brewing. Some of those are projects that we're doing at the foundation that I know she's less interested in, but I'm passionate about. Some of those are projects that have nothing to do with the foundation, that are just kind of personal passion projects. I know time is always limited, but that's kind of the way I think about it. I put most of my energy where I know it matters kind of right now, and then I always have a couple side projects. So the way I, serendipitously ended up running the foundation for Sheryl was I was running an ed tech startup. That was my big pot. But I was really passionate about, Sheryl's TED Talk. I was really passionate about women's issues. And so, I put a couple things in a side pot and never imagined that it would start to really take off, and it would become kind of my central focus. That's one kind of point. The other one that I already alluded to a little bit is, I love, side projects or doing work that just makes you feel good about yourself and kind of feel like you're making a contribution. It's just incredibly important. So if you're doing what is sometimes called office housework, and it's fulfilling to you, it's helping you make connections on your team or across the university that you think are valuable, like that's amazing. I just think you should be really clear on like where you want to get and what are the things you need to do to get there. And so as you're kind of mapping out your time, I don't know, I'd roughly have like an 80-20 or even, to be honest, a 90-10 rule where I'm spending like 90% of my time on the stuff that I need to get my own career where I want it to go, and then I'm being very judicious about that other 10 or 20%. So I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Hi. So you've talked a lot about individual things of way to kind of work within the system, and I'm wondering what Lean In has done, or thoughts that you might have on kind of reimagining the workplace and challenging the ideas we have about how the workplace is even supposed to run in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So women in the workplace, the first half of women in the workplace is looking at the data and kind of what the data tells, the data tell us. And the second half is actually recommendations for business, for companies. So that's one thing that we're doing. And it's the obvious stuff, but too few organizations are doing it. Actually, let me back up. A lot of organizations are doing what you would call the basics. They have mentorship and sponsorship programs. They have structured, or they think they do, they have structured, performance reviews, and to try to kind of make sure that everybody's kind of getting an even assessment. Don't get me, I mean, it's not generally working, but they do have systems in place. A lot of the larger, companies in the U.S., not all companies, obviously, we have a huge issue around paid family leave, but a number of the organizations that participate in our survey, because they're larger, they do have paid family leave. It's reasonably adequate. I want to make the point that generally in the US, it's not reasonably adequate, and there are lots of organizations that don't, so I don't want to be misunderstood there. But if you look, like they have a lot of what you would kind of call the basic building blocks in place. And we push really hard on all of those. What I think the biggest issue that we're seeing in the organizations that we work with, both who participate in Women in the Workplace, or just we have about 700 corporate partners, is I think they still think there's a silver bullet somewhere. Like that there's like one or two things that they can do that will like move the lever. I'm still fascinated by organizations not thinking more holistically about what they need to do. And so one of the things, as I said, Women in the Workplace, we do push a lot on what solutions are. We've been very, probably need to be more public, but we've been very public on paid family leave and a push both at the policy level and at the company level for more parental leave. More recently, we've been pushing more around bereavement leave because, again, looking for ways that men and women can take time for their families or the things in their personal lives without it jeopardizing their career or kind of competing with their career. Equal pay is something that we've been talking a lot about really publicly and really pushing for. So we by no means think that individuals, it's just on the individual to drive change. We need systemic change, we need policy change, but we do think we need both. One of the things that's really interesting is if you get in small rooms with CEOs and CEOs of big companies you've all heard from, you'll often hear them say something along the lines of, I don't understand. Like, we put all these policies in place. We have all these programs, and in some cases, that if they're a best-of-breed company, they have had them in place for multiple years, and we don't see the numbers changing. And I think some of it's because they're not thinking holistically and doing enough, and then some of it is, I think, that individual change is really critical. I mean, we all experience implicit bias. Most managers don't know what it is. They don't know how to identify it. They don't know strategies they can use to kind of help level the playing field. Shelley Carell, she runs the Claimant Institute at Stanford. She has this concept, and I'm going to kind of butcher it, so forgive me, Shelley, but it's this idea of the frozen middle, which is so organizations will often be doing, will often have a lot of the right programs and policies, their leadership is on board, but at the management level, they're not providing the training, it's not trickling down, there's not a belief across the employee base that what they're saying is really a priority for the organization. And there's lots of things that organizations need to do better, but a big piece of it is like how do they unfreeze that frozen middle and get their managers in particular and their rank and file employees more activated. So we do think it's a combination of individual understanding and individual change, and then policy change both at the company and at the larger national level. I hope that's a okay response.
Hi, my name is Lana Yarosh. I'm in the computer science department here, so we have like more than 40 faculty members and like a handful of women, one person of color, pretty typical for a computer science department. Actually, probably better than average for a computer science department. The department tries to be very supportive, but I think in general, the sense is like, oh great, we have these women and this one person of color, and they'll handle diversity, right? I'm wondering when like, sort of the converse of this book is going to come out, the like step up, like that I can give to like the men who are white in my department, or at least how to have those conversations on a larger scale to say like, actually you can do a lot for diversity because we can't do it all. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And Rebecca touched on this earlier. I mean, we do need organizations to realize kind of at every level and regardless of your gender or your color that you are part of the push for equality. One of the things, this feels a little off topic, but one of the things that Marianne Cooper, who's a gender scholar that we work with, always says that what organizations need to realize in a lot of ways, like women are the canary in the coal mine, right? Like we're 50% of the population, and if things aren't going well for women, in your organization, that means things are definitely not going well for people of color in your organization. And it also means they're probably not going as well as they should for white men too. And so I think what we do need to do is broaden that a lot of the discussions on things that we can do to support women or individuals of color are all ship rise efforts. Creating a better workplace for women means you're creating a better workplace for men and women, and men are doing more childcare than ever before. There are more couples that are splitting work at home and work at work, more equally than ever before. So I do think a big part of the conversation is how do we engage men, but also just how do we understand that the discussion we're having isn't about women, it's about creating better, more inclusive, more productive workplaces.
Hi, Rachel. My name is Jane. Sorry. Talk really loud. Talk really loud. My name is Jane. Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Have you done any work with any organizations that are traditionally female organizations in the first place, meaning that working in more of a person versus gender equity situation? Because I work in an organization that is almost all female, and I see a lot of inequities in the female organization as well. I don't know if you do any work with organizations like that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. None that I can think of off the top of my head where we're explicitly working with an all-female organization. I do think kind of going back at the end of the day, we're all individuals and we're all susceptible to implicit bias. There's lots of different, and bias is so much more nuanced than, gender, or color of skin, or sexual orientation, or sexual preference. So there's just lots of things that are, there's just lots of type of bias in organizations. So it doesn't surprise me at all that even in an all-female organization that you're experiencing that. That's kind of what I would expect. But we haven't done any work explicitly with all female organizations.
I just had a question. My name's Kathy, about you're very results oriented, as you mentioned, and it's how do we work or be successful in this environment. But then in some ways, does it perpetuate the environment?
Yeah, it's a super fair question.
Yep. And so if another woman comes along and it's like, well, so-and-so is successful because she's feeding into my stereotype, this other person is not that. So how do we stop that?
Yeah, so I think if I understand, it's an issue of, we often do say that some of the advice that we give and other organizations give, by the way, and a lot of the academics we work with give, which is just understanding some of the areas where we do face pushback or some of the barriers that we face that are unique because of gender or other things about us, and how do we kind of navigate that environment. And some of the advice is a little, I wish this wasn't what I had to tell you to do, or I wish this isn't what we needed to do now, but these are some practical things you can do in the moment. When I think about the advice we're giving, I don't think any of it is asking people to run in line with the stereotypes. If I don't think we're asking people to reinforce stereotypes. I just think we're asking, individuals to be thoughtful about how they support one another, be thoughtful about, how they're presenting themselves, be thoughtful about just decisions they're making on a day-to-day basis. So it's a really fair, it's very fair though. At a macro level, we want to drive change so that we don't have to even think about it at all, and we're going to work and we're just being the best selves that we can possibly be. But in the meantime, I think, understanding some of the reality is really helpful. I mentioned Marianne Cooper earlier, and something that she said that I thought was really interesting, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I do this myself. She was saying that one of the things that happens in families of color, and often particularly Black families, is their parents talk very openly with the children that they at times will have a different experience than other peers are having. Things will be harder for them, and they give them strategies to kind of navigate that environment. We don't often do that with our girls, which is really interesting. And so I thought about it, I was like, wow, I run an organization focused on, women, and what I often say to my daughter is, you can be anything, go for it. It's very, and I rarely say to her, it may be a little harder for you. or you might need some different strategies, and I don't think that's okay, but here are the things I'd like you to know as you kind of go up through school and kind of enter your career. And so I do think it is important that we are having realistic conversations with one another about the different experiences we're having in the unlevel playing field we experience. That doesn't mean I like it.
Okay, I think we have time for one short question, and then we will wrap it up.
Oh, this is maybe not short, but, so my question, it seems like these lean-in circles are really important to you guys' approach and your message, and I'm wondering how you address issues of intersectionality and white privilege in those groups, because it seems like often we talk about women and we have this implicit assumption or implicit bias that those are white women, straight women, cisgendered women, dominant culture women, so I'm wondering how the circles address that issue.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been amazing to watch, and I mentioned this, is it is a predominantly self-organizing community. So because of that, we have all types of circles, and I'm not aware of many of them given, but we have circles, we have a circle close to my house in Palo Alto called Lean In Latinas, and the woman who founded it, she got pregnant when she was in college and had a very hard time graduating, didn't get a lot of support. She believes education is critical, and so Lean In Latinas is a bunch of women like herself, they're all first generation, who are supporting other Latinas in the Menlo Park, Palo Alto area and making sure that they get all the way through college. In the military, groups of women are coming together with very different experiences. So the way we think about it is that women are self-organizing in ways that either they're coming together explicitly because they're different groups of women with different experiences and coming together to support one another, or what we're also seeing a lot, which is a very eclectic group of women with very different experiences getting together. So I think the self-organizing nature of circles has been incredible and allows it to be a lot more than kind of traditional, kind of white professional women. In fact, we have circles that are all over the world, very different, demographics of women participate in them. And we even have some circles run by men who are gay and who are coming together to support each other because they think they're having a different experience. So that is one of the great things about the self-organizing nature of the program. It's a great question.
Okay, so let's thank Rachel, but first I just want to point out that before the break, we're going to pass to Jody Sanford, who has a couple of words for you to think about during the break, but we are so grateful that you shared your time with us and your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So thanks very much. As Rebecca said, I'm the facilitator of today, and so I want to be explicit about what the designers wanted us to do today. Rebecca talked about doing something and realizing our own power, and the cabinet was really explicit about that. And so what we're going to spend the rest of the late morning and the early afternoon doing is to really initiate and further develop the support networks at the university for women. We're going to engage university leadership in really thinking about and talking about these issues. So you see in the brochure that the provost will be coming and some deans will be coming. And then we're going to experiment and think a little bit about action plans. And like these ideas of circles, have resonance for a way to have more self-organizing communities here that then can work with the women's faculty cabinet. So we're also going to experience the circle ourselves, which is what we're going to do right after break. So there's still some coffee up there. There's a little bit more carbs to fuel up. Okay?
Judy, there's a lot of stuff on the floor, and I'm wondering if maybe people should just do the 6 groups before they go.
Right, so what we're going to do when you come back is you are going to be in groups of 6. So kind of suggesting rather than us move the chairs, can you just kind of group chairs and nodes of 6 around during the break time in the area that you sit, and then enjoy part, and we'll be back here at 10:30.